Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most critical aspects of personal finance that everyone should have in place, an emergency fund. We're going to explore this topic through the lens of Dave Ramsey's The Total Money Makeover. This book is a classic when it comes to financial advice, and Ramsey dedicates significant time to explaining why having an emergency fund is essential and how you can start building one, even if you feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck. If you're someone who's trying to break free from the financial struggles of debt, anxiety over unexpected expenses, or the pressure of feeling unprepared for life's financial surprises, then you're in the right place. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of how to start building an emergency fund, why it's so important for your financial well-being, and how to maintain it long-term. First, let's establish exactly what an emergency fund is and why it plays such a foundational role in Dave Ramsey's philosophy for achieving financial freedom. According to Ramsey, an emergency fund is not just a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. It's the financial safety net that keeps you from going into debt when life throws those inevitable curveballs your way. Emergencies will derail your financial plan if you're not prepared. In The Total Money Makeover, Dave Ramsey emphasizes that having an emergency fund is the first thing you need to do before you even begin to tackle debt or think about investing. Why? Because if you don't have any savings to fall back on when an emergency arises, you'll inevitably turn to credit cards or loans to cover those unexpected expenses. This, of course, puts you deeper into debt and further from financial peace. So, what's the starting point? Ramsey recommends saving $1,000 for what he calls a starter emergency fund. This is the first step in his baby steps plan to financial freedom. While $1,000 may not seem like a lot of money to cover big emergencies, it's designed to give you enough of a buffer to handle smaller, more common crises like car repairs or medical copays. This amount will help prevent you from relying on credit cards for these types of expenses, which is a crucial mindset shift. The key here is to recognize that it's not about the amount of money, but about establishing the habit of setting aside money for emergencies. Now, I know what many of you might be thinking. I can't even afford to save for an emergency fund right now. And that's a completely valid concern. A lot of people feel overwhelmed by the idea of saving money, especially when they're already struggling to pay off debt or cover their basic living expenses. However, Ramsey stresses that this is where making sacrifices in the short term comes into play. If you're serious about building financial security, you need to be willing to make temporary sacrifices. Ramsey suggests that the quickest way to build up your $1,000 emergency fund is to cut back on non-essential spending immediately. This could mean canceling subscriptions, dining out less, or even selling things you don't need around the house. It's about prioritizing your financial future over temporary conveniences. It might feel tough in the moment, but once you've saved up that initial $1,000, the relief you'll feel knowing you have that financial cushion will be well worth it. Here's another key point. Once you've saved that $1,000, you need to keep it in a separate savings account. It shouldn't be mixed with your checking account where you're likely to spend it accidentally. The whole point of the emergency fund is that it's available for true emergencies, those moments in life that are completely unexpected and require immediate financial attention. In The Total Money Makeover, Ramsey defines an emergency as something that's sudden, significant, and urgent. So buying a new TV because yours is outdated or splurging on a vacation doesn't count. We're talking about things like unexpected medical expenses, major car repairs, or losing your job. After you've secured that initial $1,000, your next priority, according to Ramsey, should be to tackle your debt using his debt snowball method. This is an important step because the goal is to free up your income so you can eventually build a fully funded emergency fund, which we'll talk about in a moment. The debt snowball method involves listing all your debts from smallest to largest, regardless of interest rates. You pay off the smallest debts first, gaining momentum and confidence as you go, while making minimum payments on the rest. Now, why doesn't Ramsey suggest paying off the highest interest debt first? It's because he believes that personal finance is more about behavior than math. Sure, mathematically, it makes sense to tackle the highest interest debt first, but for many people, that approach can feel overwhelming, especially if the debt is large and takes a long time to pay off. Ramsey's approach gives you quick wins. Every time you pay off a smaller debt, you're motivated to keep going. It's about changing your mindset and your behavior, which is the key to long-term financial success. So what happens once your debt is paid off? This is when you move to the next stage of building a more substantial emergency fund. Dave Ramsey recommends saving 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in your emergency fund at this point. This is your fully funded emergency fund, and it's designed to protect you in case of a more significant financial emergency, like a job loss or major medical crisis. The idea is that if something catastrophic happens, you can cover all your basic expenses, like rent, utilities, groceries, and insurance, without going into debt. This is where true financial security starts to come into play. Why 3 to 6 months of expenses? Well, it depends on your personal circumstances. If you have a stable job, dual income household, or relatively low expenses, 3 months might be enough. However, if you're self-employed, have an irregular income, or work in a volatile industry, you might want to aim for 6 months or even more. The point is to assess your own situation and make sure your emergency fund is sufficient to cover your needs in the worst-case scenario. Let's take a moment to talk about where to keep this emergency fund. Ramsey recommends keeping it in a simple savings account. You want it to be liquid and easily accessible in case of an emergency. This is not money you should be investing in the stock market or tying up in any long-term investments. While the interest rate on a savings account might not be great, that's not the point of an emergency fund. The goal is to have cash on hand that you can get to immediately if needed. You don't want to risk losing money in the stock market or waiting for an investment to mature when you're dealing with an urgent financial situation. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that their credit card can serve as their emergency fund, but as Ramsey explains in the Total Money Makeover, this is a dangerous mindset. Using credit cards for emergencies is a quick way to spiral back into debt. When you rely on credit cards for emergencies, you're not solving the problem. You're just postponing it and adding interest to the equation. And before you know it, you're stuck paying off the last emergency while the next one hits. This is the cycle that Ramsey wants to help people break. Debt is the enemy of financial peace, and having a fully funded emergency fund is one of the most effective ways to stay out of debt for good. One of the key things Ramsey stresses in the book is the importance of discipline. Once you've built your emergency fund, whether it's the initial $1,000 or the fully funded 3 to 6 months of expenses, it's critical that you don't dip into it for non-emergencies. This can be one of the hardest parts of managing your emergency fund because life is full of temptations and unexpected expenses. But you have to be disciplined and remember that this money is only for true emergencies. If you're consistently dipping into your emergency fund for things like new furniture, vacations, or other non-essential items, you're not setting yourself up for long-term financial success. So, how do you resist the temptation to use your emergency fund for non-emergencies? Ramsey suggests setting up a separate savings account for non-emergency goals. This way, if you want to save for a vacation or a new car, you can do so without touching your emergency fund. By keeping these two pools of money separate, you'll be less likely to dip into your emergency fund for non-emergencies. This is all about creating healthy financial habits that will serve you well over the long term. Ramsey also highlights the emotional benefits of having an emergency fund. There's a peace of mind that comes with knowing you're prepared for the unexpected. When you have an emergency fund in place, you're no longer living in constant fear of what might happen. You're not constantly worrying about how you'll pay for the next car repair, medical bill, or home maintenance issue. Instead, you have the confidence that you can handle whatever comes your way. This sense of control is incredibly powerful and can reduce a lot of the financial stress and anxiety that so many people experience. Moreover, having an emergency fund can help you avoid making impulsive financial decisions. When you know you have a safety net in place, you're less likely to panic when an emergency arises. Instead of rushing to take out a loan or swipe your credit card, you can take a step back, assess the situation, and make a rational decision because you know you have the money to cover the expense. This kind of financial stability allows you to make better long-term financial choices and keeps you on track toward your goals. Another critical element that Ramsey points out is the importance of rebuilding your emergency fund if you ever need to use it. Life happens, and there will be times when you need to dip into your emergency fund to cover a genuine crisis. If this happens, your top priority should be replenishing that fund as soon as possible. This is where the discipline comes in again. It might mean tightening your budget, cutting back on discretionary spending, or even picking up extra work for a while. The goal is to get that emergency fund back to where it needs to be, so you're always prepared for the next unexpected expense. In the Total Money Makeover, Ramsey makes it clear that anyone, regardless of their income level, can build an emergency fund. It's not about how much money you make. It's about how you manage the money you have. People often assume that they can't start saving until they're earning more, but the reality is, if you're not managing your money well when you're making a little, you're not going to manage it well when you're making a lot. The principles that Ramsey teaches can be applied at any income level, and the sooner you start, the better off you'll be. One of the reasons Ramsey's approach works so well is that it's simple. It's not about complicated financial strategies or trying to outsmart the stock market. It's about common sense and discipline. Anyone can follow this plan if they're willing to make the necessary sacrifices and commit to the process. And the rewards are huge. Financial peace, the freedom to live life on your own terms, and the security of knowing you're prepared for whatever life throws your way. So if you're ready to start building your emergency fund, here's what you need to do. First, focus on saving that initial $1,000. It might seem like a daunting task, but remember, this is just the beginning. Once you have that in place, work on paying off your debts using the debt snowball method. And finally, once you're debt-free, start building your fully funded emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of living expenses. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you stick with the plan and stay disciplined, you'll get there. Thank you for sticking with me through this deep dive into emergency fund planning based on Dave Ramsey's The Total Money Makeover. If this video has helped you understand the importance of an emergency fund and how to get started, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're serious about taking control of your finances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Together, we can achieve financial freedom, one step at a time.